Hello everybody! I am trying to find room on my desk for this microphone. I like to give the impression that my desk is this spotless workspace, but it's actually just really gross. It's covered in sweetie wrappers because we're getting close to Christmas. Bits of rubbish from plugs and things like that. Loads of old paper. Paper clips, old diaries, a zombie for some reason, not even sure where he came from, a craft knife, an old tea mug full of rubbish. I mean, it is just gross. I do tidy it every now and again, but usually when I'm in the middle of writing a book, or in the middle of editing a book, or in the middle of thinking about a book, or just, generally being an author, I can't be bothered. So yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's grim. Yes, where were we? The Fury. That's where we are. The Fury. There, I have it in my hand. The Fury. Another thing clogging up my desk. The Fury is a lovely, gentle, as you know, romantic, sweet Christmas story about a group of people who are trying to find out the secret of Santa Claus. And who have a jolly nice time in... wait. No, wrong book. The Fury is a gruesome, bloodthirsty, gore-soaked zombie story, which doesn't really have any zombies in it, but kind of zombies. All of them, Brick, Cal and Daisy, have all now been attacked by the people who they love most. Or Daisy hasn't, because her parents killed themselves before they could do it, but she has been attacked by a paramedic. Cal was attacked by his friends, pretty much 200 people watching a football match, and Brick was attacked by his girlfriend and people in the garage, and they now they've started to realise basically that something has gone very, very wrong in their world. Something's gone very wrong in them, and it makes other people want to attack them. Cal is on his way north to Norfolk from London to meet Brick, who he met online on a chat room. And I wrote this in the days before TikTok and the like. And Daisy is in her house, and Cal has spotted someone he thinks who's being attacked, and there was an explosion in their car, and he thought he saw something in the smoke, like a shape, and he's also realised that something's kind of pulling on him. Anyway, I don't want to say too much, because who wants to listen to me? Well, you, presumably, since you're here. Let me just have a sip of my my very purple drink. Fizzy. And let us away into the world of the Fury once again. Just make sure we're definitely recording, and that I haven't just been rambling to a dead microphone for the last 3 minutes and 23... Oh, sorry, that's 3 minutes and 23 seconds. You're never going to get back. Cal, Boxwood St Mary, 7:07 p.m. Turn around when it is safe to do so. Cal really wished he could take the sat-nav lady's advice. He wanted nothing more than to be able to swing the Freelander 180 and get the hell out of this weird little town and back on the dual carriageway. Only he couldn't. Something had made him pull off the relatively empty A11 just after Mildenhall. That same weird, voiceless voice inside his head, making him ignore... Someone's literally just started to call my phone. I'm going to ignore it. Voice inside his head, making him ignore the instructions from the console, flick his indicator on and pull the car off the high street down a narrow road packed with houses. There were people here. A delivery driver was unpacking crates from an Iceland van a few cars down, and a bunch of teenage skateboarders were messing around on the corner, one riding on the back of another, all of them laughing. They could have been Cal and his mates outside the library back in Oakminster, not a care in the world other than the constant, ever-shifting mystery of who fancies who and what to do about it. He thought about Georgia, about Megan and Eddie and the others. It felt like a million years since he'd last seen them. The delivery driver started to sniff the air as Cal pulled closer. The crate tumbled from his hands and a plastic carton of milk burst. He ran at the Freelander and Cal pressed his foot down a little harder, accelerating. The skateboarders had caught wind of him too. With a row of parked cars on either side, there wasn't any room to manoeuvre, so Cal kept his speed at a constant 25, hoping they'd get out of the way. They didn't. The first kid meeting the 4x4 head-on like a charging bull, bouncing almost straight backwards. The others were bumped aside by the bonnet, knocked into the gaps between the cars. Cal didn't stop, even when the Freelander ran over something under its wheels, something big, something soft. He steered around the corner, guided by that strange radar in his head, a silence that seemed vast and unbroken, even though he could hear the monkey-like shrieks from behind him, the sound of doors opening, the thunder of footsteps. There was a turning to the left, and he took it, increasing his speed so that the little kids with the garden sale wouldn't sense him until it was too late. The road went down a hill, curving to the right, then rising steeply again. Whatever it was inside his head was louder now, but still utterly silent. It reminded him of being at the bottom of a swimming pool, a perfect, pitchless peace. Even though he could see the crowd running after him in his rearview mirror, even though he had no idea what lay ahead, it made him feel safe. It made him feel that he was doing the right thing. He swung round another corner, the Freelander clattering over a pushbike that had been abandoned in the road. There was movement up ahead. A man running away from Cal towards a small mob clustered outside a house on the left. There were 4 or 5 of them, a mix of men and women, and even a little boy who didn't look any older than 5. The ones he could see wore the same expression of utter fury, so fierce that it turned their faces into demonic masks. He sped up, somehow knowing the exact same thing that he had back on the motorway, that there was somebody close by who was just like him. There was no time for a plan. Cal reached the mob in seconds and slammed on the brakes, the Freelander skidding into a low wall. A woman staggered towards him, howling as she tried to worm in through the broken passenger windows. Cal reached for his bag, but he couldn't get it, the woman's fingers pinching the flesh around his throat, her breath hot on his face. He grabbed the first thing he could find, a 2-litre bottle of Dr. Pepper, using it to batter her hands away. He opened his door and tumbled away from her onto the street. "Oh, what the hell am I doing?" Another woman reached for Cal with bloodied fingers. He swung the bottle like a baseball bat. It made a ridiculous boinging sound as it hit her in the head, spinning her onto the tarmac. The first woman was crawling out of the car and Cal slammed the door in her face twice, then legged it around the back of the Freelander. One of the adults in the garden charged at Cal, stumbling on the broken wall and giving him enough time to see that the others were clustered around a gated passage that led down the side of a house. Past the bars of the gate he could see a girl. She looked maybe 11 or 12 and she was screaming, but it was a different sound from the one that the people on this side of the gate were making. It was filled not with hate, but with terror. He lifted the bottle over his shoulder, waiting until the man was almost on him before swinging hard again. It clipped his nose, a brittle crack echoing around the street. The man didn't seem to notice, grabbing Cal around the neck and squeezing, flecks of blood spraying from his face with each snorting breath. Cal thrust the bottle into the soft spot beneath the man's chin, pushing up until the hands around his throat loosened. He swung the bottle at him. It hit, but exploded, the drink fizzing out like there were Mentos inside. The man gnashed at it, distracted, and Cal punched him in the face. Something was biting him in the leg, and he looked down to see the little boy there. He knocked him away as gently as he dared, kicking the woman who followed in the face. The last guy was big, but Cal remembered his choily foot training. He stepped behind him, locking his right leg around the man's knee and then shunting hard. The guy tripped, dropping like a felled tree, his head cracking on the concrete path. Cal glanced up the street to see people hammering down it. He had maybe 30 seconds before he was swamped. He ran to the gate, ignoring the fire that burned in his muscles and his lungs. There were actually 2 people inside, the second a white-haired old lady with crooked fingers coiled around the girl's legs. The girl was kicking out at her, her face twisted by fear and blunted by shadow, her screams amplified by the narrow passageway. Cal tried the gate, but the handle wouldn't budge. "Hey!" he yelled. "Let me in!" The girl ignored him, her cries reaching a crescendo as the old woman sank her teeth into her leg. Cal glanced up the road again. 15 seconds. He swore, took a step back, then kicked out. A jarring pain tore up his leg and his back, but the gate didn't budge. He paused, breathing in through his nose, taking up a guarding stance, then kicking out again with every ounce of strength he had. The rusted lock snapped, something metal clanging down the passageway as the gate swung open. Cal ran through it, booting the old lady like he was taking a penalty. He grabbed the girl under her arms, ignoring her screams and her punches. "It's okay, trust me, I'm not going to hurt you," he said, the words only half formed in his breathless panic. He clamped her to him as he sprinted out into the garden, dodging one of the mob who was back on her feet, then tearing open the Freelander door. The woman who had climbed inside the car was unconscious, or dead, and Cal grabbed her by the hair and tried to pull her free. She wouldn't budge, her limbs locked between the seats. The hail of footsteps was deafening now, each panted breath audible. "Don't run," he said, putting the girl down and grabbing the woman with both hands. Her body slid from the car like a bag of meat, sloping to the ground. The girl took a few steps away from him, but stopped when she saw the crowd pounding down the street, maybe 20 people now, all howling. She looked up at him, her eyes so wide with shock they didn't look real. "You can trust me, I promise," he said. The kid at the head of the crowd, one of the skateboarders, Cal thought, had almost reached them. "We need to go." He held out a hand and she took it, letting him help her into the driver's seat. He climbed in next to her, slamming the door just as the skateboarder drew level. Momentum carried the kid past and he slipped on the gravel, disappearing with a yelp. The girl shuffled into the passenger seat as Cal slung the car in gear and floored it, barreling down the street. The chaos and the carnage once again safely contained in the cracked glass of his rear-view mirror. The only one who spoke was the sat-nav lady, and even she seemed relieved to Cal as he happily followed her directions out of Boxwood St. Mary, back towards the A11. He didn't take his foot off the gas, finally remembering to breathe when he hit the slip road that led back onto the dual carriageway. Only when he was doing 70 in the outside lane did he notice that his entire body was as rigid as stone. He let himself relax, tremors taking the place of the tension. "Continue on the current road," said the lady. Cal glanced over at the girl. She was curled up in the passenger seat, making it look huge. Her face was ashen, like she'd been completely drained through the cuts on her arms and neck. Her long hair swayed like seaweed in the gale from the broken windows. She stared out of the windscreen through watery blue eyes, but Cal knew she wasn't seeing anything except maybe a replay of whatever it was she'd been through. That lady's name is Miss Nagy," he said, his voice too loud, despite the howl of the wind and the heavy thrum of the tyres. It was a stupid thing to say, but Cal didn't have anything else. He glanced at the road, and then back at her. "The sat-nav, I mean. She lives in the car and tells me where to go." The girl didn't budge. At least she wasn't trying to attack him. That could only be a good thing. A car was coming up fast behind him, and Cal braced himself, indicating left and sliding into the inside lane. The BMW wobbled a little as it blasted past, but it didn't stop. Cal checked his mirrors, then pulled out again to overtake a lorry. If he moved past people quickly enough, they seemed to go back to normal before anything bad happened. "When I go the wrong way, she tells me off," he went on. "Well, she usually tells my mum off. That's why my mum called her Mrs. Nagy. It's her name for her, not mine." "Oh, smooth, Cal," he thought. "You're so great with kids." "What's your name?" he asked her. She didn't reply. She didn't even seem to notice him. He thought about leaving her alone. Maybe she was in shock or something, and he wasn't sure what you were supposed to do with people like that. Wasn't there a rule about not letting them go to sleep? Or was that for something else? Constipation or something? "Concussion, idiot," his brain said, and he snorted a laugh. The noise made the girl jump. She snapped out of whatever trance she'd been in and gazed fearfully at Cal. He saw her fingers stray towards the door handle. "Oh, Christ, don't do that, kid. You'll be pate on the motorway." And he held up his left hand to show that he wasn't going to hurt her. "It's okay. Please don't be scared." The road ahead looked clearer, and he pulled back into the left-hand lane, slowing down so that the noise inside the car was more of a summer storm than a full-blown hurricane. "My name is Cal. You can trust me. I promise you." She shuffled further back into her seat, curled up like a hedgehog. "Where are we going?" she said. Or at least that's what he thought she said. Her voice was a whisper, bound up and carried off by the wind. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "At least I think so. I'm not sure. But I'll look after you, don't worry. Okay?" There must have been something friendly in his face, because the girl seemed to relax. She rested her chin on her knees, those huge eyes never blinking. "Miss Nagy wants you to put on your seatbelt," Cal said, realising that neither of them was wearing one. He clipped on his own. "She'll tell us off if you don't." The girl looked at him, then at the built-in console where the voice came from. She reached up and pulled the belt over her curled-up legs, clicking it into the socket. They'd driven another half a mile before she spoke, her voice so soft and so full of sadness that Cal felt a lump rise inside his throat. "Everyone hates me." "They don't," he said before he thought about what he could follow it with. "They're just... I don't know, there's just something wrong with people. It's making them do things they don't want to, like zombies, you know?" She didn't respond. "Everyone's been attacking me too. It started at school. All my friends, they tried to..." He faltered, the words scared of being heard. He coughed them out. "They tried to kill me. Then people from the street, people I'd never seen before in my life." He wiped a tear away before he even noticed he was crying. Then my mum." The girl looked back at him, her mouth hanging open, and a jarring blast of adrenaline tore through Cal as he thought she was about to throw herself over the seat and sink her teeth into his throat. "Your mum tried to hurt you," she said. Cal nodded. She stared at something a million miles away, deep in thought. There was a moment of revelation there, some awful understanding. Then she lowered her head to her knees and began to sob, great heaving cries. Cal's hand hovered over her for a second or two before landing on her shoulder. Her body jolted at the touch, but other than that, she didn't acknowledge it. He gently stroked his thumb back and forth, the way his mum had always done with him when he was upset. "It's okay," he said, keeping his voice low, soothing. "It's all going to be okay, I promise. We'll find out what's going on and then we'll know how to stop it. We'll fix it. Then our mums will be okay. They won't be angry with us anymore, I promise." He was making a lot of promises for a guy who knew nothing about what was going on, but what else could he do? It didn't seem to be working anyway. If anything, he'd made the girl cry even harder. He put his hand back on the wheel, seeing a huge green sign advertising Norwich in 15 miles and Yarmouth in 40. The sat-nav said they'd be there within an hour. They would be late, but he was pretty sure Rick B., whoever he was, would hang around. He drove in silence for the next few minutes. The sat-nav lady chirping up and navigating him around a series of roundabouts. It was a while later that the girl stopped sobbing, her face rising from behind her kneecaps. Cal smiled at her as gently as he could, not wanting to say anything else in case he set her off again. But she seemed like she was cried out, wrung dry. She looked up at him, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "You really think there's a way to make things normal again?" she said. And the look she gave him, suddenly so full of hope, of trust, meant that there was only one answer he could give. "Yeah," he nodded, I really do. Whatever this is, we'll work it out together, I promise." She wiped her nose again, sniffing. Cal leant over and popped the glove box, a half-empty pack of tissues inside. He gestured at them, and she took one, patting her eyes dry, then scrunching it up and tucking it in her sleeve. She took a deep, juddering breath that seemed to shake some colour back into her cheeks. "Thanks," she said, a ghost of a smile in her thin lips, her pale eyes. "My name's Daisy." Ooh. So Cal and Daisy have finally met. I'm copying some files from one computer to the other in this hard drive. It sounds like it's about to explode. Maybe it can't handle the fury either. A brick. Hemingway, 8:48 p.m. He was late. Either that or he was dead. Where had he said he was coming from? London. If things were as bad as Brick thought, that was one hell of a journey. A gauntlet of 10 million psychotic people trying to slaughter you on the street. Thinking about it that way, it would be a miracle if he made it here at all. That made his stomachs crunch up. Like he'd eaten something bad. As much as he hated to admit it, he really didn't want to be on his own. He rested his head on the warm sand, enjoying the comforting touch of the evening sun, not too hot, not yet muffled by the evening chill. He was lying on the slope of one of the dunes that ran the length of the beach, one of the big ones that would have looked at home in the Sahara if it wasn't for the wavy green seagrass comb-over. Ahead of him was the unbroken slate of the sea, almost perfectly waveless, so smooth that he half thought he could run right over it to Holland or Denmark or whatever lay beyond the horizon. On the other side of the dune was a short stretch of pine forest, a bed of soft-needled trees into which the sun was slowly sinking. A dirt track led from them to a small concrete car park, the ugly square block of the toilets sticking up like an ulcer. There were boards over all the doors and windows, smeared with graffiti, too wind-blown and rain-washed to read. The soft lap of the waves and the whispering pines made him feel inexplicably at peace. Maybe the guy had decided not to come. Brick hadn't exactly been a charmer in his messages. He tried to think back to what he'd written, unable to recall a single word other than to come alone. That in itself had been a pretty stupid thing to say. If Cal Messi Ronaldo was like him, then he wouldn't exactly be mobbed by friends right now. Why had he been such an arsehole? Blame it on stress, he thought, twisting a long strand of grass between his fingers. Blame it on shock, on fear. But the truth was much more simple than that. He was an arsehole. He promised himself he'd make an effort to be nice as soon as the guy showed up. If he showed up. He wished he had a watch or the phone he dropped when he was riding away from the garage. Norfolk was as flat as a pancake, which meant the daylight stretched right out into the evening, but once it hit 10 it would get dark, really dark. He'd have to be back at Fursville by then, or he'd end up spending all night on the beach. An ant struggled past right under his nose, its feet moving so fast they were just a blur as it attempted to negotiate the crumbling sand. He lowered a piece of grass in front of its nose, watching it climb on board before gently letting go. The ant scuffled off along it, vanishing into the tangled web. "You're welcome," he said, sitting up to stretch his spine, trying to shake the blood back into his legs. The knees of his jeans were wet. How did sand always manage to stay moist even on a day like today? He was brushing the blotchy stains with his hands when he heard a car, distant but unmistakable. He ducked back down, peering through the mess of seagrass, his heartbeat rising along with the pitch of the engine. It seemed to take an eternity before it finally showed itself, the thing that trundled from the tree line, not a car but one of those baby Land Rovers. There was something, blood maybe, spattered all over the crumpled bonnet, as bright as paint. The passenger windows were wound down or broken, and a massive crack stretched diagonally across the windscreen, making it difficult for him to see inside. The car limped over the concrete and pulled up next to the toilet block. Nothing happened. Nobody got out. "Come on," Brick whispered. He worked his jaws, his ears feeling like they were blocked, the same way they did when he swam too deep. The strange silence clashed with the fear, making him feel weirdly seasick. The car was pointing straight at him, and he got the feeling that whoever was inside was watching him, waiting for him to make the first move. It was ridiculous, of course. Nobody would be able to spot him tucked behind the dune, unless... He looked to his left and right, scanning the beach. What if the guy hadn't come alone? What if there was more than one of them? His friends might have spread out, flanking the car park, ready to attack him from all angles. He swore. Why hadn't he brought a weapon? Fursville was full of metal bars and old tools. There were even knives in the restaurant. All he had here were his own 2 fists. It wasn't too late to retreat. If he slid down the dune, he could walk back along the shore. They'd never be able to find him. Unless they follow your footsteps in the sand. He swore again, his mind wheeling. He'd had hours to prepare for this. What the hell had he been doing all that time? Sunbathing and rescuing ants? Calm down. You're panicking like an old woman. Keep it cool. It's going to be okay, he told himself. So was he supposed to make the first move? It was like one of those old spy films. He wiped a hand across his forehead, sand sticking to the sheen of sweat that had broken out there. He still felt that weird pressure in his head, a silence that was almost a sound. It was as though something was inside his brain, inside his thoughts, and he suddenly felt ridiculously exposed. He squinted, trying to make out the shape behind the steering wheel. There was definitely somebody there. What did you expect, Brick? A ghost? But was that somebody in the passenger seat too? The car horn blared, and Brick almost screamed, his rasping cry lost in the flap of a dozen birds that took flight from the trees. Adrenaline was a white heat in his veins. Suddenly he was all too conscious of how uncomfortable he was, of the damp creeping into his clothes, and the sand scratching in the crook of his elbows. The horn honked again, twice. Just get out of the car, he hissed into the dune. I'm not showing myself until you do. His words were too quiet to carry, but they worked anyway. There was a loud clack. Then the driver's door swung open with a painful squeal. Somebody clambered out, and Brick had to lean to the side to see him through a loop of seagrass. It was a kid dressed in a grey tracksuit trousers and a t-shirt. The boy brushed a hand through his hair as he scanned the car park, looking maybe 16 or 17. "Hello!" the boy called out, the tremors audible in his voice even from where Brick was lying. More birds blasted from the trees, and he spun around, his hand moving towards his lower back. There was something under there, Brick realised, a lump beneath his shirt. The kid had a weapon. Again, that instinctive need to get away almost ripped him from the dune, numbed by the same weird, calm silence that sat like cotton wool inside his head. "Is anyone there?" the boy called out, his words drifting effortlessly over the hot ground. "Rick!" Rick, Brick thought, before remembering his login name. He felt an answer surging up from inside him of its own accord when he heard the sound of the passenger door opening. He clamped his mouth shut as the boy shouted something at the car, gesturing at whoever was inside. Brick couldn't hear the reply, but it didn't matter. The kid had broken the rules. He began to retreat. This wasn't worth the risk. One teenage boy he could handle, but if there were two or maybe more in there, then he was in trouble, especially if they started to attack him the same way as everyone else. The car was almost out of sight when the passenger climbed out. Brick paused, shuffling back to the top of the dune. The other person was a little girl, tiny next to the Land Rover, her face crumpled by anxiety. She was wearing black trousers and a burgundy polo shirt with what might have been a school badge. A boy and a kid, maybe brother and sister. Even if they did go crazy, Brick thought he'd be able to handle them. So long as he took out the guy first, he could easily outrun the girl. "I guess we're about to find out," he thought. Then he ran his hand over his forehead once more and got to his feet. Cal, even. Did I say Hal? Cal. There's not a new character called Hal. That'd be so confusing. Cal, Hemingway, 8:55 p.m. "There's nobody here," Cal said to Daisy. "Yes, there is," she replied, looking up at him. Don't you feel them?" Cal shook his head, but there was something there, that same strange, ebbing sense of peace ringing around his skull. He swept his eyes over the car park again, nothing but cracked concrete and small drifts of sand. The toilets were boarded up, which was a definite relief. Some places were just plain creepy. The gun was tucked into the waistband of his trousers, and every time he nudged it back into place, he worried he would set it off and blast away half of his backside. He should have left it in the car. "See?" Daisy said. He followed her line of sight to the dunes that hid the sea from the car park. Somebody was walking down them, a tall man with hair so ginger that it glinted like copper in the fading sun. He was wearing jeans and a filthy white t-shirt, and his long, gangly arms were held out to his side, his fingers spread. "Is he going to hurt us?" Daisy asked, running to his side. Cal didn't reply, holding her tight with one hand. He felt the weight of the gun, cold and sharp against his back. "Oh, please, don't let me have to use it. Please, God, let him be okay." The man, it was difficult to tell how old he was, stopped at the bottom of the dune, about 10 or 15 metres away. This close, Cal could see the bloodstains on his t-shirt, looking more like chocolate in the growing pool of shadow. Dried blood pocked his face as well, an ugly-looking wound above one eye. There was something about the guy that made Cal instantly suspicious, something in the bluntness of his cheekbones, the narrowness of his eyes. And yet there was something inside his head, more the absence of something really, a feeling that was telling him it was okay, that the red-haired man was one of them. All the same, for a good minute or so nobody moved, everybody wary of the same thing, that someone was about to start screaming, to charge across the car park, fists flailing and teeth biting and eyes boiling. Those 60-odd seconds seemed to stretch out forever, everything perfectly still, only the quiet lull of the unseen waves and the crack of the trees letting Cal know that time hadn't frozen. Daisy was the first to stir. "He isn't attacking us," she whispered, looking up. The guy must have heard her because he snorted a laugh, his hands lowered to his sides, but he was still visibly tense. "Are you Rick?" Cal asked. The man squinted, holding up a hand to shield his eyes. The sun was over Cal's shoulders, nesting in the treetops, lighting the kid from the chest up. "What do you think?" he said, his brow crinkling. "I thought I told you to come alone." This is Daisy," Cal said, feeling suddenly and overwhelmingly protective of the girl. "I found her on the way. She's like..." He almost said us, but it was too early for that. She's like me. She got attacked too." Daisy lifted her hand and gave a flick of a wave. "I'm Cal," Cal went on. Then he ran out of things to say. The man watched warily, his eyes dodging back and forth between him and Daisy. "Cal Messi Ronaldo," he said. "You like football then?" It was spoken more like an insult than a question, so Cal didn't answer. He could feel his hackles rising. The gun slid further down the waistband of his tracksuit, and he had to nudge it back. It was so heavy that if he wasn't careful, he'd be standing here in a minute in nothing but his pants. The silence that followed was just about as awkward as silences could be. That's underpants, by the way, for Americans. I'm Brick, the guy said eventually. Brick? Asked Daisy. The man smiled, just a slight twitch of his lips, but a smile nonetheless. It seemed to make his face more human. Because of my hair, he said to her. It's the same colour as a brick. No, it's not, she replied. Bricks are sort of pink, and your hair is bright orange. Brick's smile grew, finally reaching his eyes. Cal could see that despite his height, Brick wasn't much older than him. You can call me Carrot if you like, he said. He looked back at Cal and the smile vanished. Seconds of silence ticked away, the gulls circling overhead like vultures. What's going on out there? Asked Brick. It's bad, Cal said. You're the first person I've seen who hasn't tried to rip my head off other than Daisy. It's like the whole world has gone insane. Brick nodded. He glanced to his right, then back at Cal. Yeah, it's really hit the fan all right. He was chewing on something, and after a moment or two he spat it out. It's going to get dark soon. I've got a place, a safe place, I think. It's about 20 minutes from here. I haven't got any food or lights or anything. We've got food, interrupted Daisy. Got loads of stuff in the car. It's Cal's, not mine. That's good, Brick went on. It's not ideal, but nobody knows about it. You can come if you want. Duh, thought Cal. We just drove all this way to say hi, but now we're going to hit the road again. Of course we're coming, he thought. But instead he said, Sure, okay, can we bring the car? Brick looked at the Freelander as if it was another unwelcome stranger. Cal shifted his weight, and as he did so he felt the heavy knuckle of metal slip from his waistband and down his legs. It hit the concrete with a crunch. Brick's eyes widened as he saw the gun there. Then, before Cal could say anything, he turned and ran. Wait! Cal yelled. The guy was bolting with impressive speed, his arms and legs pistoning him back up the dune. Wait, it was just in case, I wasn't going to use it! Brick wasn't listening, practically vaulting over the dune in a shroud of kicked-up sand. Oh, Cal swore, then bent down and snatched the gun. Wait here, he said to Daisy, legging it across the car park. He jumped onto the dune, his feet sinking as he charged upwards. He reached the top in time to see Brick sprinting down the beach. Brick, wait! He shouted. The older boy didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Cal started down the slope, making it 4 or 5 paces before realising that as fast as he was never going to catch up with him. Instead, he lifted the gun, pointed it straight up, and pulled the trigger. The recoil juddered down his arm into his shoulder, ending up as a painful cramp beneath his ribs, so shocking that he almost dropped the revolver. His ear broke into a high-pitched song. It worked, though. Brick missed his footing and sprawled onto his face. He spun around, crawling backwards like a crab, the whites of his eyes visible even from where Cal was standing. Cal kept the gun high, pointing towards the skies, half thinking that the bullet was going to come right back down and cave in his own head. He took a deep breath, gunpowder like firework smoke in his lungs. I'm not going to shoot you, he yelled. I only brought the gun in case you were crazy. Look! He lobbed the pistol towards Brick. It landed halfway between them, burrowing itself into the sand. Then he held his hands up, ignoring the part of his brain that was screaming at him. You're an idiot! Do you know what you've just done? He's going to kill you now. It's yours, okay? Just take it. Just don't leave us here alone, okay? Very slowly, Brick got to his feet. He was stooped over, hunched into himself like he was expecting another shot to come from somewhere else. He walked back through the craters of his own footsteps, picking up the gun by its barrel and holding it away from him. It reminded Cal of a kid carrying scissors. There was a frantic puff of breath, and Daisy appeared by Cal's side, grabbing his right hand with both of hers. They looked at Brick, who stood statue-like, the gun still held out before him, his shadow a huge lowercase T on the beach. Please don't leave us, Daisy said. We weren't going to hurt you. It seemed to take an age for Brick to nod at her. We better go. The sound of that shot must have carried for miles. He turned and walked slowly along the shore, keeping close to the water. Leave the car here. We don't want it to leave the tyre tracks. Just grab your stuff and follow me. Daisy. Hemingway, 9:13 p.m. Daisy walked between the two boys, breaking into a trot every few seconds to keep up with their giant strides. She was exhausted, her legs aching from the sand and her hands from the 2 carrier bags she held, but she felt safe. Which was weird, really, considering she'd broken one of the most important rules, one of the things her mum and dad had drummed into her again and again and again. Never, ever talk to strangers, and certainly never, ever, ever get into a strange boy's car and let him drive you across the country to meet another even stranger boy and then go with them both to a secret place that nobody else knew about. She should have been more nervous, but that usual horrid feeling in her chest and stomach she got when she was scared, like there were living things crawling around inside her, just wasn't there. It might have still been the shock of what had happened. It might have been the fact that in the last few hours everything in her life, everything she knew about the world had changed. But there was something else too. "So, where are you from?" she heard a Cal ask. He was a few paces in front of her, a huge black duffel bag over his shoulder, and the last carrier bag gripped in one hand. The other boy was a few paces in front of him, and he wasn't carrying anything except the gun. They were almost walking in line. The sea was still to their right, huge and shiny like a big bit of silver foil. The dunes rose to their left. The sun had dipped behind them now, making the sand look more like wet cement. She jogged forwards a few steps until she was by Cal's side again. "You from around here someplace?" "He's from the Larkman," Daisy thought idly, which was weird because she'd never heard of the Larkman before. "Norwich," Brick grunted without looking back. "Oh," thought Daisy. "A place called the Larkman, actually," he went on. "You won't have heard of it." "Cool," said Cal. He smiled down at Daisy, and she smiled back without having to think about it. Cal was nice, and she could trust him. Even if he hadn't saved her life, she'd have known that. He wasn't from Norwich. He was from a place called Oak Minster or something. It made her think of a church made of wood. That little piece of knowledge floated in her brain like an ice cube in a glass of water, kind of see-through and almost invisible, but definitely there. It made her head feel cold, not in a bad way. "You okay?" Cal asked her. "You want me to take those bags?" "I'm okay," she replied, not wanting to feel even more like a kid than she already did. With her parents not around anymore, not gone though. Remember what Cal said, he could make things normal again. She'd have to look after herself for a while. She couldn't expect these boys to, because everyone knew boys were a bit rubbish. She looked up at Brick's back. Even in the dark, the bigger boy's hair seemed to glow orange. He hates it, she thought. Not because of the colour or because people tease him, but because it reminds him of his dad. Her head was full of ice cubes, each one different, all of them clinking little bits of knowledge over her thoughts. "Who did you say attacked you?" Cal asked. "Your girlfriend, wasn't it?" Brick shot a look over his shoulder that was easy enough to read, "Don't go there." But it softened after a moment. He bent down and picked up one of the little stones that littered the beach, lobbing it out into the sea. It went a long way. Daisy felt sorry for it, because it would be stuck in the cold, dark water for ages. Maybe forever. "That's how it started, yeah," he said as he walked. "We were making out, you know, then she just went mental. She bit me." He turned again and pointed at the wound above his eye. It looked dirty and horrible. Wasn't just that, though. She was a proper psycho, tried to claw me to pieces. No reason. I didn't do anything. Then I went to the garage to get help, and a load of people came after me. They wanted to kill me. He's not saying something, thought Daisy, and another ice cube floated by inside her mind. A dark corridor and some steps, a locked door at the bottom of them. The thought gave her a bad feeling, an unpleasant tickling in her stomach, and she pushed it away by focusing on the gulls that bobbed on the sea. They peered back at her, and their little eyes reminded her of the people who had attacked her, the ambulance man and Mrs. Baird and all the neighbours and people she'd never seen before, because there was nothing at all in those eyes. They were hollow, black marbles. "You call the police or anything?" Cal asked. Brick shook his head. "They'd have come after me too. I don't know how I know that, but I do." He looked at Cal. "You know it too." So did Daisy. Everyone would come after them, no matter where they went or what they did. Until they found a way to fix this, the whole world would have the fury. This wasn't another ice cube thought. This was a big flashing light in her head, impossible to ignore or push away. "The fury," said Brick, nodding as if Daisy had spoken it out aloud. "Question is why? Why us?" The only answer to this was the sound of the sea as it lapped the beach with its foamy tongue, that and the gentle cries of the gulls settling into bed. Did they sleep on the water? That was odd. How did they not capsize in the middle of the night? They walked in silence for a few more minutes, Daisy falling further and further behind as the soft, uneven ground took its toll on her legs. She tried to make sense of the other ice cubes. She could see one with a pretty girl reading a book. That was Cal's. There was another of a pier full of arcade machines that was too see-through to make any sense of. There were nasty ones too, people screaming and biting and punching and kicking and chasing that belonged to both of the boys. Daisy surfed through them like someone channel flicking, not really understanding how these things could be inside her head, unless she was imagining them. After a while, Brick moved off to the left, towards the dunes. Up ahead the beach narrowed, and she could make out a weird wooden thing like a huge collapsed rope bridge stretching over the sand into the sea. She jogged to catch up, almost stumbling. Cal waited for her at the bottom of the dune, Brick already halfway up. "You sure you don't want me to take 'em?" he asked, hiking his bag over his shoulder. "I don't mind." "It's okay," she said. I think we're almost there." How did she know that? She wasn't quite sure. She just did. Just like she knew she'd see a big wheel even before it rose over the top of the dune like a rusty metal sun. The ice cube image was almost exactly the same as the real one, laid over it and shimmering ever so slightly. Only in the ice cube the wheel was actually turning, people visible inside the rocking carriages. Could she smell donuts too? She blinked and the ice melted. The wheel was ancient, nothing like the big one in London that she'd been on. Bits had even fallen off it, some of the metal poles in the middle and 3 or 4 carriages too. It looked like a giant that was missing some of its teeth. Brick flapped gracelessly down the other side of the dune towards the huge fence. Daisy saw that there wasn't just a Ferris wheel ahead, but a whole theme park. There were 2 roller coasters by the looks of things, and one of those rides that whizzed up and down and made you feel sick just looking at it, and a large square building with a roof like waves. Her heart lifted when she saw a carousel too, although she could only make out the painted cone-shaped roof over the fence. She loved carousels. It was the closest she'd ever really come to riding a horse. "It's a theme park," she said. Brick turned, and somehow a smile managed to land on his sour face again. "It used to be," he said. "Don't get excited though, nothing works anymore. But it's safe, nobody ever comes here apart from me." It didn't matter if nothing worked. There still might be horses. In fact, couldn't she see them now, like another one of those weird half-invisible thoughts that made her brain feel cold? She could see their kind eyes, and their long noses, and that horrible dark corridor, and the steps going down, and the locked door, and something behind it that moaned. Her skin went prickly, and she ran to Cal, walking by his side as they followed Brick down the dune onto a concrete walkway. It ran alongside the fence, and about halfway down, Brick squeezed through a gap and disappeared. He was waiting for them on the other side when they caught up. "Watch you don't scratch yourself," he said to Daisy. "The wire's pretty sharp." Cal grabbed the fence and pulled it open, and she looked at the gap. She searched inside herself, looking for warning signs, looking for those little electric currents that told her something bad might happen. But they weren't there. Other than that corridor and the locked door, which might not even be real, which might just be in your head, she thought. She felt absolutely 100% safe. She crawled through the gap on her hands and knees, standing and dusting herself off as Cal followed. Brick shushed them out of the way, grabbing a huge piece of wood on which she could make out the letters "Candy Floss and." He rested it over the fence, giving it a shove to make sure it was firmly in place. Even with the exit blocked, Daisy couldn't feel the slightest trace of fear. In fact, she couldn't remember ever being anywhere before where she'd felt quite as much like she was supposed to be. Brick turned and stretched out his long, freckled arms. This time his smile was nervous, almost bashful. "Cal? Daisy? Welcome to Fursville." I've got a feeling we're quite close to the end of the... Oh yeah, we're very close to the end of the second part of the book. So I'll try and get through 2 more chapters. Before it gets dark. That's better. Cal, Fursville, 10:02 p.m. It could have been a romantic dinner if it wasn't for the fact that he was eating a packet of prawn cocktail crisps, and the person sitting opposite him on the other side of the candlelit table was an ugly ginger guy called Brick. They were on the first floor of the pavilion, in a small restaurant called Waves. On one side of the room was made up of floor-to-ceiling windows, but there was no sea view anymore. They'd been boarded over from the outside, much of the glass cracked and stained so that the stuttering candle was reflected in it several times, making it seem as though the room was alight. The whole place was an inch deep in dust and cobwebs, and the stench of sea rot hung in the air along with the smoke. His discomfort must have shown, because Brick snorted out another one of his not-quite laughs. "It's not the Four Seasons or anything," he said. "Oh, it's fine," said Cal, funneling the crumbs into his mouth, then flattening the crisp packet against the mouldering tablecloth. Daisy lay on a small, damp chaise longue to their side. She'd climbed on it about 5 minutes ago, and she was already fast asleep, her snores as soft as velvet. "It's safe. It's definitely safe. Nobody's ever here, ever." That wasn't a surprise from what they'd seen in the last half hour. Brick had given them a guided tour, acting like he worked here as he showed them the roller coaster and the log flume and the carousel and the dodgem track and the overgrown miniature golf course. What he really should have been doing, Cal thought, was showing them the emergency exits, the safest hideaways, the supplies, the weak points, the lookout areas. At the very least, he could have pointed the way to the toilets. But no, he walked around muttering about arcade machines and donuts and which was the best seat to take on the flume if you didn't want to get wet, even though none of it even worked anymore. Cal hadn't said anything, though. It did seem quiet here, and from what he and Daisy had seen in the car and the drive up, this part of the coast was as good as deserted. There would be plenty of time to shore the park up in case people came looking. He sighed, hard enough to make the candlelight flutter. It was the first time he'd admitted to himself that this might not go away overnight. It might not go away at all. "What?" Brick asked. "Nothing. This whole thing, it doesn't feel real." "I know," said Brick. "It feels like another lifetime that I was riding out here with Lisa, that we were fine." Another lifetime, thought Cal. It really did. How long had it been since he was back at his school playing football? Maybe 10 hours? 10 hours for the rules of the universe to unravel around him, for everything he knew to turn to rot. It reminded him of a poem they'd done in English, but he couldn't remember how it went. Something about things falling apart. They sat in silence, both of them chewing their own thoughts as the candle guttered like a chesty breath, a death rattle. "Your girlfriend," said Cal, "Lisa, is she, You don't have to worry about her," said Brick sharply, with a look that told Cal it would be better not to pursue the subject any further. "You have any idea what might be causing this?" Cal asked, quickly changing tack. "I mean, I can't think of anything except genetics, maybe." "Huh?" Brick grunted. "Like cats. You know how some cats are? They just need to see another cat and they go for it. They fight to the death sometimes. Dogs too, I guess." Brick nodded, deep in thought. "But something like that doesn't just happen," he said eventually. "You don't just flick a switch and everyone hates you." "It wasn't just that with me," Cal said. Daisy stirred, snuffling and pressing her face into the chaise longue. He waited for her breathing to even out again before continuing. "Things have been strange for a few days now. People were ignoring me, acting weird. I thought they were just playing games, but..." He didn't need to finish. Brick drew patterns in the dust on the table, the nail on his forefinger a crescent moon of dirt and blood. When he lifted his arm, Cal saw a circle with 2 X's for eyes, angry slanted eyebrows, and a down-turned mouth. A smiley, without the smile. Somehow, without properly acknowledging the thought, he'd known that was what Brick was going to draw. "The Fury," Brick mumbled, looking at his creation. "Good name for it, right?" "Certainly fits the bill," Cal said. "Why us, though, and why now?" Brick's eyes met Cal's for a fraction of a second before bouncing off. He leant down and rummaged in a carrier bag, one that he'd picked up from the foyer as they were passing through. He hefted a laptop from it and laid it carefully on the table, covering up his dust drawing. "I need to show you something," he said as he opened the lid. Cal heard the whine of the hard drive coming to life, and the boy's face was suddenly bathed in a sickly white glow. Cal got up, wiping the dirt from his palms as he walked around the table. Brick was online, the browser showing the same Yahoo Answers page that Cal had seen back home. He could see Rick B's original message, and below that his own panicked response. Brick peered up, looking half his age from this angle. "It's not just us," he said. "I know," Cal replied, watching Brick's eyes widen. "I saw it happen on the motorway. A ton of people on top of a car attacking somebody inside. It was someone like us. I'm not sure how, I just know it." He choked as the memory burned back, the flames from the explosion seeming to sear the flesh of his brain. Brick turned to the screen. When he raised his dust-blackened finger to the trackpad, it was shaking. "It's not just that," he said. "You weren't the only person to reply. Look." He scrolled down the page slowly enough for Cal to read the 11 answers that followed his, all of them but 2 almost a carbon copy of his own. By the time he'd reached the last, he felt like he'd run a marathon, that or been punched hard in the gut. He had to lean on the back of Brick's chair to stop his disco legs throwing him to the floor. "That's from 4 hours ago," Brick said, moving the pointer over the time of the last entry. 6:05 p.m. I haven't checked since then. He led the arrow up towards the refresh button, and Cal almost screamed for him not to press it. He didn't want to see. He didn't want to know. Brick clicked. The page loaded up painfully slowly. The Yahoo header, then the adverts, then the frame, then Brick's message. The answers followed, all together like they were being vomited onto the page. All 48 of them. "Jesus," said Cal, and this time he had to sit on the chair to the left of Brick's. His body felt numb and cold. "Please tell me they're not all real." Brick was scrolling down again, and his ghostly pallor had nothing to do with the light from the screen. Cal watched the boy's face crumple into itself a little further with each new answer that he read. It seemed an age later when he finally turned his red, swimming eyes up. They looked at each other properly for the first time, and despite their differences, they could have been mirror images. "Brick?" Cal asked. "What do they say?" "The same thing," he breathed, breaking away to the screen again. "They're all exactly the same." "What do we do?" Brick didn't reply, the candlelight giving his skin a waxwork sheen. "Like he isn't real. Like none of this is real," Cal's brain insisted. "How can it be? How can this be happening?" "Brick, what do we do?" Brick looked up, and this time when their eyes met, Cal knew exactly what Brick was thinking. "We tell them," Cal said. "We tell them about this place." "Well, we have to," Brick confirmed. I don't want to, but we have to, right? Look, you and me, we haven't killed each other, or Daisy. If we're different," Cal said when he saw him struggling. "Yeah, if we're different, if there's something about us that's different from the others, from the Fury..." He's given it a capital F, Cal realised. It's more than just a word now. "Then we have to get together," Brick went on. "As many of us as we can. It's the only way to be safe. We can figure it out." "But you can't tell them where we are," Cal said. "Not on there. What if the others find us?" "Brick, we need to think about this." "We don't have time," he replied, tapping his finger on the top of the screen. Cal noticed the battery icon there, red and flashing. "It's about to shut down, and there's no power here." Cal swore, loud enough to stir Daisy again. She wriggled over, opening her eyes and seeing him. By the time her distant dreamer's smile had faded, she was asleep again. "Look," said Brick quietly, "I won't tell them about Fursville. There's a second-hand car showroom just over the road. It's empty. I'll tell them to go there and wait for someone to come to them. We can keep watch on the place, and if anything looks suspicious, we just won't show ourselves, yeah?" Cal shook his head. "Yeah?" Brick repeated. "Okay," Cal said, throwing his hands in the air. "Okay, whatever." Brick was already typing. "You're not alone. We have a safe place. There's a few of us here and we're not attacking each other. If you can get to us, we're in a town called Hemingway in Norfolk. Right. Sorry, that was me burping, not Brick. Right on the beach up from Hemsby. On the main coast road, there's an abandoned car showroom called Soapy's. Go there and wait. We'll check it every day at noon." He stopped, running both hands through his hair. "Will that do?" he asked. Cal didn't reply. Brick read through it once more, the pointer hovering over the post reply button. I guess it'll have to do." He clicked, and 5 seconds later the post appeared on the refreshed page. "You know it's not going to take a genius to work out that if we're not in the showroom, we're going to be in the bloody great big empty amusement park next door," Cal said, slumping back. "We should have met them at the car park." "It's too far away," Brick said. "We'd have to make that slog every day. It's not safe." "This isn't safe," Cal snapped back. Brick closed the laptop, tapping his fingers on it. "We need to make extra sure this place is secure," Cal went on. "Seal up the fence, have an emergency plan just in case." It took Brick a moment to look up. He stared at Cal, but it seemed that he was peering through him at something much deeper. "Things fall apart," he said, his voice as low as the guttering candle. Cal shook his head as the poem he couldn't remember, the one he'd learned at school, tumbled from Brick's lips. the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Brick looked away, firelight burning in his eyes as he finished. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and goddamned everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. And we've got time for one more chapter. Then we meet someone new after this chapter. We meet someone new, but we'll save that for next time. So this is the other part 2. In his presence the mountains quake and the hills melt away, the earth trembles and its people are destroyed. Who can stand before his fierce anger? Who can survive his burning fury? His rage blazes forth like fire, and the mountains crumble to dust in his presence. Nahum, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Nahum 1, 5-6. Murdoch. So we're back with Murdoch. If you remember, Murdoch was... Murdoch was the policeman in London who got called by his friend who's a pathologist to see a corpse, and this corpse is breathing in and nobody knows how because the air isn't going anywhere. Murdoch, Thames House, London, 11:40pm. Look, I just want to know what's going on. Detective Inspector Alan Murdoch had been speaking the same words to the same locked door for the better part of 3 hours, and it was nearly 24 hours now since he'd been bundled into a car along with Jorgensen and his assistants from the morgue and taken to the massive MI5 HQ by the Thames. He was being treated like a terrorist, as though somehow he was responsible for the freak corpse and its endless breath. When he'd first arrived, they'd strapped him with diodes and sensors and asked him question after question, blatantly refusing to answer any of his. And after that he'd been thrown into this basement room to rot. He hadn't even been allowed to call his wife. His mobile phone and his police radio had been confiscated, so had his warrant card. He was supposed to have been home this time yesterday. She'd be worried sick. He felt something shift in his gut, the dread of never seeing her again, of never holding his baby boy. Oh, you're being ridiculous. It's the exhaustion talking. Only he knew it wasn't. He'd seen it, this impossible thing, this living corpse which made a mockery out of everything he knew. Reality had begun to crumble, and here he was with a front row seat to the end of it all. I really am sorry, said Jorgensen, for what must have been the 100th time that day. He sat on the other side of the small room. No, not room, cell, looking 100 years old. I never should have called you in, Alan. No, you bloody well shouldn't have, Murdoch thought, saying, this isn't your fault, Swen. You were just doing your job. The pathologist gave him a weary smile, then planted his head back in his hands. Murdoch slammed his fist against the door, hard enough to hurt. You got no right to keep us in here, damn it, he roared. They'd been given water and a sandwich each, but that had been hours ago. Murdoch's hunger was lost behind the rage inside his gut. I'm a police officer. I have a right to know what's going on. Rights. Murdoch laughed bitterly. He had no rights, not here, not in the heart of government's secret service. They could hold him forever and make sure nobody ever asked any questions. But why? There was a metallic clang from outside the door, followed by footsteps. A key turned, then the door swung out to reveal a man and a woman in orderly uniforms. The man was holding a tray with more sandwiches and 2 bottles of water. He started to walk in, but Murdoch barred his way. You can't keep us here, he said. I demand to see your commanding officer. I'm sorry, sir, said the woman. I'm afraid nobody's available to speak to you right now. Please wait inside the room, added the man, and there was a definite or else that he left unvoiced. Murdoch bit his tongue, looking past the orderlies to see a long, windowless corridor. At the end of it was a reinforced metal door guarded by armed men. Murdoch knew that's where it was, the living corpse. The thought of it there, so close, made him shudder. Even as he watched, the door opened and a group of people walked out. They wore a mix of uniforms, some military, top brass, some white surgical coats, but they all wore the same expression of fear. They strode down the corridor and turned out of sight. Look, said Murdoch, forcing himself to stay calm. I don't want to cause any trouble. I just want to go home. My wife, she doesn't know where I am. Can you at least tell me how long you're going to keep us here? The orderlies must have seen the desperation in his gaunt face, because their expressions softened. The truth is, we don't know, said the woman. There's something... They're saying it's bad. Really bad. They're holding anyone who's had any contact with it. Did you see it? Yeah, said Murdoch, sighing. And they're right. It's bad. Take this, said the man, passing the tray to Murdoch. It might be over soon. They're bringing in some kind of expert. With any luck, they'll be able to work out what's going on and get you guys out of here. An expert, said Jorgensen, walking over. What kind of expert? The man shrugged, saying, just somebody who might know what this thing is. And what it wants, Murdoch's mind added. The sound of voices rose up, a group of soldiers walking out of the same corridor the others had left by. They headed up towards the guarded door, and Murdoch saw somebody else with them, somebody dressed in black robes. The orderly looked over her shoulder. That's him now, she said. The expert? Jorgensen asked. The man and woman both nodded. No way, Murdoch said, scarcely able to believe what he was seeing. The soldiers reached the door, and the man turned, revealing the white collar around his neck, the heavy crucifix that hung over his chest. The expert wasn't a scientist, or a doctor, or a general. He was a priest. Uh-oh. So, now on to Saturday. Day 3 of The Fury. I hope you enjoyed that. Yeah, I'll be back very soon, probably tomorrow. Maybe I might try and get some done tomorrow, but we've got a busy day tomorrow. If not, it'll be the day after, Friday. And we'll find out what happens next to Daisy, Cal, and Brick, and a brand new character who we are about to be introduced to. Have a great day, whatever it is you're doing, and I will see you very soon. Thank you for tuning in, and look after yourselves. Take care. Love you. Bye.